Stanley Crouch, who is Charlie Parker?
Well, Charlie Parker was one of the finest American musicians, and he was what is often called a genius, or the word genius is used, but it usually doesn't describe the person. That's just an advertising term now. But Charlie Parker actually was what the word genius means. But he not only was a remarkable technician of his instrument, but he embodied what the power of jazz really is, which is the ability to be able to play and to hear. And much of his early life was learning how to hear. See, so that because a jazz musician actually has to hear the entire context in which he or she is improvising and and react at digital speed to the sound that's going on around them. So Charlie Parker became one of the most masterful exponents of that ability. It's not magic, but people don't usually know that that's what a person has to do.
Is all jazz improvised?
No, but the majority of it is. Now there are some people who written what they call through composed pieces, in which every note that you hear has been previously written, and that the players are actually performing a written composition. Now that doesn't mean the artistry is not used, because every great concert musician actually does that. They don't make anything up. They just color it with different nuances. And so the artistry of a concert musician is like that of an actor. If you play Hamlet, you are going to say to be or not to be, right? But it's the way you say it that makes it an artistic statement or not. So if you say it, what a jazz musician does is a jazz musician is like an actor who, in reacting to other actors, makes up his own part. And his own part has to go with what the other people are saying to him. So he has to immediately make sense. So the great achievement of jazz itself that was first proven by Louis Armstrong is that human beings can actually respond that quickly to each other and create order. See, creating chaos is not a problem. We can get a group of little kids and we'll say, just start playing it. They'll make a bunch of noise, right? But when you get a bass line that sounds good, a drum part that sounds good, a piano part that sounds good, a horn part that sounds good, that's pretty remarkable. But people have to learn how to do that. And Charlie Parker, genius though he was, he had to learn how to do it like everybody else in jazz does.
Where was he from and when did he live?
He lived from 1920 to 1955. He was
35 years.
No, he didn't get to 35. He died at 34 because he died 6 months or so before his birthday. So he was, but he grew up in a Kansas City that was actually a 20th century extension of the Wild West, because he grew up in a totally corrupt town in which the mayor was no good, unless corruption is considered an achievement. If that is what people think, then the mayor of Kansas City, when Charlie Parker was there, Tom Pendergast, he was a very successful mayor. He was a complete crook. And the mafia was there, and one of the guys I quote in the book says, well, in Kansas City, people didn't have locks on their doors of their places, because they stayed open all the time. They never closed. So whatever you wanted, you could get it at any time. If you wanted sex, you could get it. If you wanted to gamble, you could get it. If you wanted liquor, you could get it. Whatever you wanted, legal or illegal, it was always available. And so Charlie Parker grew up in that world, you know. And part of what he learned when he was a kid was that whatever happens in life, there's always an opposite version of it. And see, so when he was a kid, he was kind of, he had so many things come to him so fast that he learned that people live one way during the day and they live another way after dark. And so one of his jobs when he was 16 years old, they put on sex shows upstairs on Saturday nights. And so he's sitting there on the bandstand and he's seeing these women dance around, sit on tables and remove money with their vaginally. They would sit and there would be money, and then they'd stand up and the money would be gone. They would see women have sex with other women, men have sex with other men. And he was sitting there with the saxophone playing while this was going on. So he didn't grow up in a world that was innocent. He may have been innocent when he entered it, but he definitely wasn't when he left it. So it's kind of startling to realize in our era that there were people who lived even more extreme than modern American people do. You know, there's no place necessarily that you and I can immediately go and see a sex show. That's very doubtful. But it wasn't doubtful if we lived in Kansas City in 1935, we could have done it. And so that's part of what the story is. And all of that stuff, all of these guys created this very beautiful music in the middle of all of that. And that's part of the victory of jazz, that there's still something that human beings respond to that has nothing to do with a context that surrounds them that may be completely corrupt. Because Lester Young, who was one of Charlie Parker's big influences, the saxophonist, the whores who used to work outside of this club called the Reno Club in Kansas City, they liked him. And they would tell each other, I like him. I like that silky saxophone that he plays. And you know, to me that's like, now we're talking about people who live disreputable lives, but there was something beautiful in Young's playing that they could hear. You know, they might have lived under garbage most of the time, but some kind of way there was something that allowed them to still respond to something beautiful.
Stanley Crouch, how segregated was Kansas City at the time Charlie Parker grew up?
Well, it was fairly segregated.
Was that an issue?
It was not really an issue after dark, because the musicians will tell you that, well, you could actually live in an integrated world when it was early in the morning after hours. And that was true in Louisiana and in New Orleans. That was true in a lot of places. In fact, the local governments often were very resistant to a jazz world, because jazz actually encouraged people to deal with each other as just individuals. That it didn't say, oh, well, you're white and you should know him, or you're Jewish and you should know him. That was all secondary stuff in the jazz world. If you could play, you could play. And if you couldn't play, you couldn't play. If you couldn't play, being black didn't make it any easier for you. If you could play, being white wasn't your liability. That was all secondary stuff.
Stanley Crouch, his new book is Kansas City Lightning, The Rise and Times of Charlie Parker. He's also the author, of course, of the All-American Skin Game and a columnist for the New York Daily News. What do you write about in the Daily News?
Well,